going to create a politically unsustainable position because he's going to be exposed. This was his last gambit. This is why the Israelis are holding on, because it's now turned out that he's defeated nobody. It started out with October 7th. They still haven't had that full investigation. When they do, Benjamin Netanyahu's political career is over because it'll become apparent that, his failures as a leader helped create the potential for October 7th to happen. As he fought the Hamas, as Hamas fought him to a standstill, he had to, expand the war to justify staying in power. And so he went to war against Hezbollah. And he killed Hassan Nasrallah and, had the pagers blow up and, he was going to win there. Then he expanded the conflict into Syria. But this wasn't enough because no matter what he did, he didn't solve any of these problems. He still had, the same domestic political problems that he faced, totally unpopular with the people of Israel. Remember, this is a guy that even before October 7th had hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the streets demanding his resignation because he was seeking to alter fundamental law in Israel so that he was above the law. He couldn't be prosecuted for the corruption charges he's currently being prosecuted with right now. He's like a Ponzi scheme. In order to stay in power, he had to keep expanding. But it was all a lie because he was never going to achieve any victory. The final straw was, of course, Iran. Now, for Iran to be possible, the United States had to be a part of it. Israel would never have attacked Iran to the scope and scale they did without American involvement. And he just happened to have an insane sucker in Washington, D.C. that listened to his garbage and agreed to this. But it failed. There's nowhere else Netanyahu can go with this. Nowhere else. So you're looking at the political collapse of Netanyahu, inevitably. He cannot survive this. The truth will come out about the damage that has been done. If just don't pretend you live in a world where Iran took out the totality of American military infrastructure in the Gulf Arab states and did no damage to the Israelis. The same weapons that took out the American bases did damage, and Israel's hiding this. But significant damage has been done to Israel. The Israeli military knows this. Now they're trapped in a forever war in Lebanon. Hezbollah, who they thought they had defeated, isn't defeated. And Gaza could blow up again. Syria is out of control. And now, what Netanyahu's done is created a new Iranian threat in the form of Turkey, where they're saying, well, we have to expand this. Turkey's a NATO member. And Israel's talking about the potential of armed conflict against Turkey. It's over. And so from the Iranian perspective, this is one of those situations, just wait, and the problem will resolve itself. Israel's on the fast track to national insolvency. Their economy is trash. That's why they needed the Abrams Accord. And their biggest partner in the Abrams Accord, United Arab Emirates, is going bankrupt as we speak. Acts of desperation, calling in $3.5 billion loan they gave to the Pakistanis, evicting 15,000 Pakistanis and stealing their money in the process. Withdrawing from OPEC so they can flood the market with their oil, but they can't because the Strait of Hormuz is closed to them. So, Israel is collapsing. The whole scheme of Greater Israel is collapsing. The best thing the Iranians could do is just let it collapse. Sometimes just get out of the way and let things happen. And that's why I think that you're not going to see a comprehensive regional peace plan because it's impossible. Israel right now is. I mean, look at the Iranians. If we had this conversation, I don't know, in April of last year, and we said Iran was going to destroy everything and do all this, we'd both be like,
exactly.
Maybe escalation management, maybe, but I mean, the Iranian government doesn't do decisive stuff like this. Well, they did. Why? Because it's a battle of existential proportions. They have no choice. They were given no options. Trust me, had they been given options, I believe they would have taken those options. History shows this. But they had no options, so they struck into. Israel's in a similar boat right now. Israel's facing a struggle of existential proportions. And the last thing you want to do is try and back a nation that's facing such a struggle into a corner where they have no options. All right? Let Israel die. Let them die, because that's what's happening. They're dying. Let them die. That would be my advice. But but I just don't see, if Iran forces this issue, I don't see Israel yielding, because we're talking about, again, another narcissist, Benjamin Netanyahu, who's looking at his political legacy and looking at dying in jail. So it's very personal to him. Why force the issue? Why force his hand? Why compel him to do something irrational? Right now he's containable. He's trapped in a war that he can't win in Lebanon. And he has political problems at home. Don't give him an opportunity to become the martyr. So that's why I think it isn't. We're not going to be seeing decisive moves against Israel. Israel lost this war. They lost it. It was a big gamble on his part. And that's why Israelis are mad at the United States, because they know that if the United States is seeking to withdraw, that's the end of the gambit. They can't win without the United States.
I think that's the main concern right now, because an Israeli official or source told CNN that the United States is seriously considering removing sanctions on Iran. And Israel is concerned about it.
We have no choice. I love that. They're seriously. It's one of the demands that Iran's put down for conflict termination. Iran's not walking away with sanctions in place. That's not going to. And remember, it's not like Scott Bessent sitting there in his little desk going, sanction them, and there's no repercussions to America. Iran's got the world by the throat, choking the world off. So the United States can't sit there and say, well, we're going to delay. We have to make a decision. We have to make a decision soon. And so this is where I think Iran, has. I love that meme they put out. Donald Trump, America's holding all the cards. And so the Iranians showed Donald Trump and a handful of, but it's Uno cards, where holding the cards is a bad thing. And the Iranians are sitting there with a smaller hand with all the good cards going, yeah. But that's the truth. The Iranians have the advantage here. We proved Operation Freedom can't do anything. Do you understand how humiliating it is that we went to war against ourselves? That means we panicked. That means we have no impact. We have no ability to project power in there. The red, white, and blue shield that we put over the Strait of Hormuz was fictional, just like everything else we do is fictional. So the United States is going to lift sanctions. And I think that's one of the things the Russians are telling them, the Chinese are telling them, that there can be no peace without the lifting of sanctions. Now, the United States is going to, we always play stupid games. And so we'll say, well, there are certain sanctions that are in play that are linked to, terrorism. And if Iran continues to support Hezbollah and the Houthi, then they're supporting terrorist entities, and therefore these sanctions will stay in place. That's a bold statement to make while you're being choked off. So we'll see how long that lasts. I have a feeling that the Russians and the Chinese are saying, no, it must be comprehensive, that all laws, it's going to be tough for the United States, but at a minimum, all international sanctions, United Nations sanctions, have to be lifted, and the United States needs to lift sanctions that are attached to the nuclear program, ballistic missiles. The terrorism aspect of it, you need congressional consent. And so here we have an issue right now because a lot of Republicans aren't inclined to support, the total lifting of sanctions. And even if they were, the Democrats could drag this thing out until November, and then, we have a different reality. So that's one of the areas I think Iran is going to have to be frustrated with, because there's certain political realities at play that aren't conducive to the total lifting of sanctions, no matter how justified that is. You've got to be realistic. But the most important thing is the lifting of international sanctions. China's already shown that American secondary sanctions no longer frighten anybody. They've just told the United States, pound sand. If you sanction us, we sanction you back, and it's total economic war, and you can't win. And that's the truth. So Iran, I think gets by having international sanctions lifted, then diving into the SCO, diving into BRICS, and just hugging them so tight that the United States will never be able to separate them with any domestic legislation, and the Russians and Chinese will never again allow the United Nations to impose Security Council mandated sanctions. I think that's the future of Iran. It's a good future, by the way. I personally, you and I have had this talk before. I think that's the future for Iran. I think the future isn't militancy, isn't aggression. I think the future is, a decisive pivot to the east. Now, your president's going to have to stop being in love with the West, and your foreign minister is going to have to stop being in love with the West, and a lot of Iranians are going to have to start falling out of love with the West. I don't mean to hate us, but we're not the solution. We're the problem, especially as long as you have Europe the way it is and the United States the way it is. It's fanciful thinking to imagine in the near future a United States willing to do trade with Iran on an equitable basis. You can't trust us. We're liars. We lie about everything. We can't be trusted. And Europe's the same way. They're dysfunctional liars. The people that have been upfront and honest with the Iranians over time, especially recently, are the Russians and the Chinese. And I am continually flabbergasted that there's still an element within Iran. And I understand it because there's a significant Iranian diaspora here in the West, a lot of connectivity back and forth. But at some point in time, you know, even the Iranian diaspora has to recognize that if you truly love Iran, the solution isn't anything imposed by the West. The solution is Iran pivoting to the global economic future of the world, which is in Asia.
Scott, do you see any sort of false flag operation to sabotage everything? Because we had Naftali Bennett 2 days ago arguing that if the United States leaves the region, that's going to bring a new 9/11 to the United States. And
I don't see that. No, I don't see it at all. There may be an attempt, but the idea that that's going to trigger a repeat of a failed legacy. I mean, I know the United States is insane. And Albert Einstein once, or at least been attributed to him, said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So we had a 9/11 that got us involved in 20 years of global war on terrorism that we lost, straight up lost. I know we killed a 57-year-old diabetic. Yay, SEAL Team 6. You guys are so good. You rock, baby. And we got Saddam Hussein hung by the neck until dead, even though he had nothing to do with 9/11. But we just were humiliated in August of 2021 with the final withdrawal from Afghanistan. And the idea that we've now just lost a war with Iran and we're going to be sucked back in because of some false flag attack, I don't see it. I don't see anybody falling for that.
How do you see, Scott, the future of the United States foreign policy when it comes to Israel and what Israel wants from the United States, which we know that these endless wars, they literally want the United States to fight each and every war in the Middle East and in the region for them. And it seems to me that Donald Trump is just the peak of what could have happened, and it's not going to be the same way as it was, as we've been witnessing with the Trump administration as time goes by in the United States.
Donald Trump's a political animal. And the game is survival. And, he needed Miriam Adelson to get elected. So he took her $200 million bribe and he staffed his team with all the people that Miriam Adelson liked, especially Marco Rubio and Secretary of State. She wanted him to be vice president. And this team, this golden team of Zionists have humiliated Donald Trump, humiliated him. And this is a man who is vindictive as the day is long. If his political legacy is on the line, and the threat that exists that can destroy this legacy comes from this very Zionistic enterprise that he has empowered with Miriam Adelson's money, he'll drop that in a heartbeat. There is no loyalty in Donald Trump, none whatsoever. He has no obligations. It's all about power. And I think you'll see that he's going to divorce himself from the Zionists as quick as possible. And anybody who peeps gets fired. Heads will roll because of this war. Just people need to understand that. And it won't be Donald Trump's head. He's going to take Pete Hegseth is dead man walking. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen soon because the man's just an embarrassment. You saw his testimony for the United States Congress. The guy is, hyped up on, some sort of testosterone-induced cocaine substitute. How dare he speak to the United States Senate in the way he did? I wish I had been a senator because I would have leaped out of the seats and punched him dead in front of the world. I'd go to jail for that gladly because he's a disgrace, this Secretary of War. he doesn't have a right. He works for the American people, and he's up there arrogantly defending illegalities and he's not smart. He's just not a smart person at all. So his head will roll. I think Donald Trump's going to get rid of him as fast as possible. This will be Pete Hegseth's failure. Marco Rubio is a more difficult, aspect. He's a combined national security advisor, secretary of state. It might be time to pull Rubio in, and relieve him of his national security advisor status, bring in somebody new, and leave Rubio with the Secretary of State, because I think that the dual-hatted also helped get us involved in this war. Scott Bessent, again, is a man who's just brought economic catastrophe. He's also alienated the United States with China, and it may, we'll see if Trump does have this meeting with Xi Jinping. I don't think Bessent comes out of this meeting looking very well. I think he's a humiliation to the United States. He's a detriment to Donald Trump's legacy, and we may see his head roll too. And now suddenly you're sort of in a Zionist-free zone. You've created a Zionist-free vacuum, and if you staff it with the right people, you're no longer doing Israel's bidding. And I think that's the direction we're heading. Donald Trump is a political animal. 60% of the United States population today views Israel as bad juju. 59% view Netanyahu as bad juju. These are unprecedented numbers. And it's only going to get worse. The American people, unfortunately, we don't have a moral compass. I thought we did, but we don't, because we allowed genocide to take place, and we allowed this illegal war of aggression to take place. The people aren't against the Iran war because it was the wrong thing to do or it was against the law. They're against it because we lost, and they're feeling the price of the pinch at the pump. Bill Clinton knew this. That's why on his war room in 1992, they had the sticker, "It's the economy, stupid." It is or 1991. It is the economy, stupid. 92, I guess. Gotta remember which election year cycle. But that's what wakes America up. We don't have a moral compass. We just understand when it pinches us in the pocketbook. And right now, Israel is pinching us in the pocketbook. And so, goodbye, Israel. And I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see a decoupling of the United States from Israel. I don't know how is this sustainable, because now it comes down to a question of how quick Israel collapses. I do think that Israel is going to be experiencing extreme economic difficulty in the not so distant future. And it's going to be so extreme as to promote depopulation. And as people flee Israel and go back to where they belong, which isn't Israel, it demographically becomes almost impossible to sustain the notion of a Jewish homeland. So, that's what I think is the direction we're heading with Israel.
Scott, we had two administrations, the Biden administration forcing Russia to react, to somehow start a new war with the case of Ukraine. And again, the Trump administration doing the same, forcing Iran. Because we know, by the way, the two countries were trying so hard with Russia in 2021, December 2021, trying to do everything to negotiate with the United States and NATO. And we had the same case with the Iranian case. They were negotiating 2 times while the United States was, somehow, preparing behind the scene to attack, to do a surprise attack. The two countries were forced into these new positions that they're in. And is that going to happen with the case of China as well? Because we had some sort of tariffs on China, but militarily, is that going to happen again?
We have no military power. What are you talking about? What do we got? We had theory. We had the theory that we were the most powerful blue water navy in the world. We had theory that our aircraft carriers would be able to project power in a way that could intimidate China, or the U.S. Air Force could do the same. What the Chinese now know is that the U.S. Navy is a paper tiger. It'll get sunk before it gets anywhere near the Chinese coast, and there's nothing the United States can do to stop that from happening. And they also now know that the air defense umbrella that's currently postured over Taiwan won't work, and that all they have to do is take the Iranian game plan, saturate it with drones on day one, and the Chinese have a whole bunch of drones. Watch the depletion and come in with their sophisticated ballistic missiles, and in 3 days, Taiwan is destroyed. That's the reality right now. And so the United States isn't going to militarily intimidate China. The other reality is that China can shut down the South China Sea and choke off Japan and South Korea at will now. It's no longer a theoretical capacity. We now know the United States has no ability whatsoever to seize control of the South China Seas from China. We also know that China can use proxies to shut down the Strait of Malacca, perhaps Indonesian proxies, another choke point. We're seeing literally the end of an empire, the American empire. The American empire was premised on control of the seas. Our blue water navy, we were everywhere. We can't control anything, and we just proved it. I mean, that's why this Operation Freedom Defeat is such a big deal, because it proves the United States is just as impotent as the day is long. So I don't think we have the same thing. And now we get back to Russia. The thing about Russia that people need to understand is that Vladimir Putin's been playing, in my mind, a brilliant game that happened because he made a mistake. He didn't make a mistake going into Ukraine. The special military operation, he had no choice. He was given no choice. The mistake was believing that Ukraine was agreement capable, because the whole premise of the special military operation was to get Ukraine to the negotiating table quickly. It wasn't to take Kiev. It wasn't to do any of that stuff. It was to put pressure on Ukraine to have it negotiated in. And we saw that immediately after the conflict started. They began negotiating in Gomel in Belarus. After 3 or 4 rounds there, they ran off to Turkey, and within a month or so, they had an agreement. And that would have been the end of it. That would have been a great Russian victory to get the agreement they wanted. But NATO, the United States, and Ukraine turned out to be agreement incapable. And so the war escalated.